All right, we're in Psalms chapter 127. The first question, summarize the principle expressed in verse 1. And I want to read verse 1 from the New International Version. It says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And there are many ways we could summarize this, but one way that's simple is that human effort without divine effort is in vain. Human effort without divine effort is in vain. Human effort should be combined with, we must be working with the divine effort. And therein we find meaning, significance, value. The next question, think of at least two stories in the Bible that illustrate this principle. There are many, but just want to take two, one from the Old and one from the New. The Old Testament in Joshua chapter 7 records the story of the battles of Ai, chapter 7 and chapter 8. The children of Israel have just taken the city of Jericho, miraculously defeating this great walled city. And now they come to Ai, which is not as strong as Jericho. And because of that, they think it's an easier battle. And Joshua does not consult God. They go into the battle without God, with a smaller group of men than they would have done normally, because they figured the people are not as strong. And even though they are still they are mightier than the people of Ai, even though they've just had this great victory against Jericho, had other great victories previously, they are miserably defeated. They are laboring with their power, with their might, with their ingenuity, with their ability, but they're laboring without divine effort, and so their efforts are in vain. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. That's the King James Version of this psalm. And so we see here the principle holding true. The second part of that story in chapter 8, they do join with the divine. Now God is working with them, and they are mightily successful, and they have an overwhelming defeat of the people of Ai. And so we see the converse of this principle, that working with divine effort, human effort, is magnified and is amazing. The second example is in the New Testament. In Luke chapter 5, there are stories recorded of the soon-to-be disciples. Peter says that Jesus tells him, launch out into the deep and try to have a catch of fish. But he says, we've labored all night and didn't catch anything. We've labored in the night, which is a more favorable time for catching fish. We've labored as expert fishermen, which are very qualified and able to catch fish. They know what to do. They knew when to do it, and they tried, and it failed. Again, back to our principle, unless the Lord is building the house, they're laboring in vain that build it. Despite their ability, despite their qualifications, despite their ingenuity, they are not able to have success. But then Jesus tells them, launch out, and he says, at your word, master, I will let down the net. And so now we have their human effort. They still had to let down the net. They still had to skillfully pull it back in. They still had to do the things that they knew were right to do, but they did it in cooperation with the Lord's building, with the Lord's watching, with the Lord's divine effort. And because of that, they succeeded, and mighty were the results. So one story in the Old Testament, another story in the New Testament, showing this principle that unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Third question, think of at least three ways this can apply to our individual lives today. I'm going to rattle off a number of ways. There are so many. Of course, we can think of this in the area of our decisions, our major decisions of life, where we're going to live, if we're going to live in this city, of this state, this country. And unless the Lord is building, unless the Lord is prospering our efforts to move to this country, to this state, to this city, those efforts will prove vanity. Yes, in the short term, it may look great, but long term, when we look back over our life, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we will discern that if God was not guiding in that decision, it was in vain compared to what it could have been if we had followed with the Lord's leading. And so with that, we need to be seeking, is God building in this direction? Yeah, the salary may look good in that city. Yeah, the salary may look better in that country. Yeah, the opportunities may be great, but are we working with the Lord? Is God building in that direction? Is God keeping that city for me? Is God guiding me in this? And unless the Lord is doing that, all of our efforts, all of the good salary, all of the good opportunities, all of the promising elements of that will be in vain. These big decisions, like something like where you will live, where you will work. There's the kind of field you'll go into if you're a college student deciding your future. If you're looking at engagement, if you're looking at marital decisions, you're considering dating someone, or you are dating someone, or considering marriage. Is the Lord building in this home? Is God building a family for you and that individual? Unless the Lord is building that city, unless the Lord is building that home, you are laboring in vain. All of your marital counseling, all of your efforts before, all of your premarital engagement counseling, all of these things will prove to be in vain unless the Lord is building that house. And again, it's not to say that you can't have a marriage without God, but in comparison to the joy, in comparison to the fullness, in comparison of the greatness that can be in a home with the Lord, all efforts without Him are in vain. We can see this also in the areas of our finances. We have big financial decisions. If we're going to purchase a home, if you're going to decide if you're going to purchase a condo versus a townhouse versus a home, or if you're going to purchase in this city or that county or those different things. Again, is God leading in the decision? Is God moving now? Is this the time to buy a home? Should I wait 5 years? Should I wait until we have more saved up? Or should we pull the trigger now? Again, unless the Lord is building the house, unless God is guiding in this, all of our efforts, all of our ingenuity, all of our clever counseling, all of our financial advice, all the seminars will be relatively in vain. Again, that's not to say that people don't have success without God. They do, but compared to the success that can be had, the comprehensive success, doesn't necessarily have to mean financial success, but overall, when we look at the overall trajectory of our life, decisions made in harmony with the building of God are always much more profitable than those that are made without. And those are a few ways. You can, of course, think of many other big ways, but even in the smaller decisions, even the decisions in your home, you're married now and you're deciding together if you should have a child, when you should have a child. Again, these are still bigger decisions. But even with those children, if you're deciding things day to day, things for this week, things for this month, is the Lord leading in this decision? Is God building with me, or am I pursuing this outside of His direction? Now, quickly, I want to bring something, because I know looking at this, it seems a little extreme. It's, well, is God guiding and directing in the small areas of my life? How is God directing? Am I to expect some light from heaven? Am I expect an angel to declare to me where I should send my child to school, or if I should have a child, if I should move in this home? Am I supposed to be looking to the skies to see where God is leading? Well, I want to share quickly some examples of how the apostles dealt with this question. This is going to Book of Acts in chapter 16, talking about Paul and Silas in this case. This is Acts 16 and looking at verse 4. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the decrees for them to keep that were ordained of the apostles and elders which were at Jerusalem. Skipping on to verse 6. Now when they had gone throughout Phrygia and the region of Galatia, doing what they mentioned in verse 4, they were forbidden of the Holy Ghost to preach the word in Asia. After they had come to Mysia, they essayed to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit suffered them not. Now, these are two cases here where they're trying to go somewhere and the Spirit forbids them. The Spirit suffered them not. There's a number of things that this teaches us. What I want to focus on is the fact that they thought the way we determine, because this is Paul and Silas here. They're not trying to build without God. They're not trying to do a city without working with God. They're working in harmony with what they believe to be God's will. But how did they do that? They did that by thinking. They did that by strategizing. They did that by on their own, without any external divine revelation. They decided that Asia was a good destination for them to try to preach the gospel. Then they attempt to go to Asia, and it says they are forbidden. They attempt also in verse 7 to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit forbade them again. So here we see that building with God does not always mean that it's building with an explicit divine revelation. That does not mean that God is going to put a halo over the person you should marry. It does not mean that God is going to drop out of the sky and say, this is the job that you need to have. Many times, as Paul and Silas illustrate, God's leading is by us initiating. We thinking, using our ingenuity, using our ability, using the means at our disposal, checking the internet, Googling, finding a good real estate agent, getting some marital counseling, getting some advice from friends, getting some advice from others, looking and figuring out on our own, and then by these means, seemingly natural means, pursuing what makes the most sense, what's the most reasonable option, and then sometimes God will give us indications that this is not his desire, that he is not building in that direction, like we see here. And that was not to say that they shouldn't go to Asia, because a few chapters later, in chapter 19, the same Paul goes to Asia. And in Acts chapter 19, verse 10, it says they continued there for the space of 2 years, so that everyone in Asia heard the word of God. So it's not to say that they were not to go into Asia indefinitely, but they were to not go there now. But again, the way they discerned that was by thinking, was by practicing good judicious skills. They by evaluating what is the best place for us to preach the gospel, trying that, and then the Spirit forbade them. So putting this all together, and I think it's a very important principle for us all to learn and walk by, we are to build with God, yes. But that does not mean that we are not to think. It does not mean that we're not to try. It does not mean that we're not to reason through the best options. And this brings us back to the fundamental principle stated earlier, that human effort without divine effort is in vain. But the conclusion of that is that we are to work with God. Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 3, he says, we are laborers together with God. Other translations say co-laborers. It's God working and we are working with him. We are to exercise judicious skill. We are to try to think what's the best decision to make, but putting that before God, saying, God, look, this is what I think. This is what I feel is the best decision. This is when I think we should be married. This is when I think we should have a child. This is when I think what we should choose for our children. This is where I think we should live. This is the job I think. This is the project on that job that I think I should pursue. But put that before the Lord in prayer and asking him to give us indication concerning his will. And looking for and trusting those indications. Oftentimes he'll give us indications just by bringing revelations of what is a good and bad decision. He'll show us warning signs, give us red flags. That's what I've seen in my own experience. I've done something like this. I've prayed and asked God, well, what do you think? And sometimes he hasn't just directly forbidden a decision, but sometimes he'll give indication and say, whoa, that might not be the best decision. Those red flags come up in response to my prayer. And from that, I begin to consider other options, or somehow he just enlightens us to see this is not the best decision. But I just want to put, these are some biblical principles of how we can learn and how we must learn to work with God, because only the work that's done with him, it will bring true success.